It's that time of year again where a mentally unstable PTCGL player, is there any other kind, tells you about all the decent cards coming in the next set. Temporal Forces launches on Thursday, March 21st at 10 AM Pacific, 1 PM Eastern in Pokemon TCG Live. While it's a small set featuring just 162 cards, that doesn't mean your credits are safe. We have the return of A-Specs, a few good EX Pokemon, and a surprising number of good rare Pokemon. It is worth noting that since I'm doing this video early, a large number of the cards I mentioned will likely end up being free as part of the 2 new free decks on the Temporal Forces Battle Pass, or as part of the 8 new free decks PTCGL will give out to everybody until March 2025. So stay tuned for those announcement videos where I'll highlight any of the staple cards you get for free without spending a single credit. For now, to make things easy, I'll include a list of all the best cards in the description so you can easily copy and paste it into Live and fill any holes that you might be missing come the 21st. There's a lot to get to, so let's begin. Put simply, you should craft 1 copy of every single A-Spec. Well, every A-Spec except Neo Upper Energy. Maximum Belt is an insane tool card that boosts the damage you deal to EX Pokemon by 50. Prime Catcher is an item-based Guzma that will win you and lose you several games. Hero's Cape increases the hit points of the Pokemon it's attached to by 100, and Master Ball goes and gets you any Pokemon from your deck. Master Ball isn't 100% necessary since it's mostly just useful in Lugia, but it'll be good to have regardless. Then we have the Ancient Awakening Drum and the future Reboot Pod. Awakening Drum really only works in the new Roaring Moon deck, but being able to draw up to 6 cards with an item is bonkers. And Reboot Pod can accelerate up to 6 energy into play from your discard pile. But yeah, just like that new Matrix movie, Neo Upper Energy can be avoided. There's just better options for pretty much any situation, and relying on a single copy of a special energy to power up a stage 2 isn't a good strategy. A-Specs cost 600 credits each to craft, so if you want to get the 6 best ones, set aside 3,600 credits. Moving to the supporters, it's easy to see the small set size of Temporal Forces on full display. There's only 6 in total, and 4 are worth owning. Looking at the Ancient and Future supporters first, you want 4 copies of Explorer's Guidance, the backbone of the Baby Roaring Moon deck. Yes, it's massively destructive, discarding 4 cards, but that's kind of the point. Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking, meanwhile, is just a reprint of Mallow, stacking any 2 cards on top of your deck. It combos perfectly with Radiant Greninja and Bibarel, or you can even get cheeky with Arcephone. From what I've seen, owning at least 2 copies is the way to go. Speaking of owning at least 2 copies, there's Eri. Super useful in Snorlax stall decks, and also good in Arceus decks, Eri discards up to 2 items from your opponent's hand. This means you could force a Charizard or Chen Pao deck to lose 2 rare candy, or any other deck to lose 2 switch cards they've been sweatily clutching the entire game. Then we come to the slightly less playable supporters. I recommend at least 1 copy of Morty's Conviction. A potential draw 5 supporter can be quite useful, and several post-rotation decks don't mind having cards in the discard pile. We're getting a tool in May that pairs well with it, but for now you can skip Bianca's Devotion. It's far too situational and there just aren't many targets that can reliably use it. But when Twilight Masquerade brings us the A-Spec that looks like it belongs in my secret closet, maybe Bianca's time will come. Then we have Salvatore. The whacking off potential is high. Similar to Wally, Salvatore allows you to evolve a Pokemon the same turn it comes into play. However, it can't evolve into a Pokemon with an ability. Can you imagine how badly PTCGL would break if Path to the Peach was still standard legal at the same time as Salvatore? I mean, it'll probably break in Expanded, but that would require people to play Expanded. Anyways, Salvatore is a luxury, not a necessity. It'll be fun to play around with when it comes to a Bronzong Evolution Lock or Banette X Item Lock deck, but that's about it. So only craft Salvatore if you enjoy whacking off. I'd say craft 4 copies of Buddy-Buddy Poffin, but I'd be shocked like Ash getting hit by Pikachu's Thunderbolt if there aren't like 12 copies given away in the free decks. If not, get 4. It's amazing putting any 2 Pokemon with 70 hit points or less directly onto your bench throughout the entire game. Hand Trimmer, meanwhile, is something you'll want 2 copies of. Useful in more than just stall and control decks, Hand Trimmer prevents your opponent from stockpiling all their best cards in their hand. When played, each player discards their hand until they have 5 cards remaining. Lost Zone and Stage 2 decks will be very unhappy to get hit with a Hand Trimmer, then an Eri, that's for sure. Oh, and I know I've mentioned it before, but always be sus when your opponent smiles as you're gearing up to play the Trimmer. Finally, Boxed Order is for filthy control decks and no honorable person should craft it. Seriously, you shouldn't even be looking at the screen right now. And I shouldn't be showing it to you, so let's just pretend this doesn't exist and move on. There's 2 tools in Temporal Forces and you want to get 2 of both. Pretty much the only use for Heavy Baton will be with Iron Hands EX. Iron Hands has a 4 retreat cost, so if it's knocked out, you can move up to 3 energy from it to your bench Pokemon in any way you like, allowing you to loop hands. Then we have Rescue Board. Perfect for Lost Box decks to easily retreat Comfey and to Lost Vacuum away to boost their Lost Zone. It reduces the retreat cost of whatever Pokemon it's attached to by 1. And in the unlikely event the Pokemon it's attached to has 30 hit points or less remaining, the retreat cost is removed entirely. Since your opponent can just bump it on their turn, Full Metal Lab is a skip. Maybe you can include 1 or 2 copies in the new Metang Dialga deck, but again, they can just bump it and you have a wasted card in your deck. As for Perilous Jungle, it puts 2 extra damage counters on poison Pokemon between turns. Pair it with Brute Bonnet and Radiant Sneasler, and now you can deal 50 bonus damage to your opponent's active each turn. And finally, craft yourself 3 copies of Mist Energy. I've seen Charizard EX decks in Japan run a single copy, while Lugia V-Star runs 3. That's because it prevents all effects of attacks done to the Pokemon it's attached to. Mainly Roaring Moon EX's Frenzied Gouging and Giratina V-Star Star Requiem. Unless the devs change something between now and March 21st, every A-Spec will cost 600 credits each. And Trainers and Special Energy will remain 100 credits each since they're uncommon. In total, without any help from the as of yet unknown free decks, you'll need to set aside 6,000 credits for all the best trainers in Temporal Forces. But again, expect that number to be significantly less thanks to the free decks. Now we move to the support Pokemon in Temporal Forces. Unfortunately, there aren't too many worth mentioning. Yeah, you'll still be relying on Mew EX, Squawkabilly EX, and Lumineon V for maximum consistency, but that doesn't mean the few won't be impactful. The whole reason the Future Box deck exists is because of Iron Crown EX, and you'll want 4 copies at 600 credits each. Baby Miraidon starts out at 40 base damage, but with 4 Iron Crown, it's 120 for a single energy. Then there's Iron Hand Sex. Ampu Very Much starts at 120, but with 4 Iron Crown, you're at 200. Based on what I've seen from Japan, Iron Hands EX is finally going to start living up to the hype, and all it took was Cyberpunk Cobalion. Want to know the best thing about Metang? It's a freaking common! Getting a full playset is just 160 credits, and it's a great card. The ability is weaker than Magnezone's, but it makes up for that by being a stage 1. For each Metang you have in play, look at the top 4 cards of your deck and attach any Metal Energy to your Pokemon in any way you like. Dialga V-Star gets better with rotation, baby! For the Roaring Moon deck, 2 copies of Flutter Mane will be extremely useful. It shuts off the ability of your opponent's active Pokemon when it's in the active, making it a perfect starter. It's also annoying as a single copy in other decks like Gardevoir and Baxcalibur, as it can attack in a pinch, doing 90 and spreading 2 damage counters. I'll admit that Dudunsparce is a fairly niche Pokemon. Bibarel is better in most instances, but for something like Golden Go, Dudunsparce is great and you'll want 3. Same goes for Tinkaton EX. You evolve into Dudunsparce, draw 3 cards, then shuffle it back into your deck. If you have to make a cut though, this is probably it. And finally, get 1 Relicanth. This is most definitely a card for people who enjoy whacking off. The ability allows each of your evolved Pokemon to use any attacks from its previous evolutions. As time goes by, it will get better and better, but for now, a copy in Feraligatr is a great idea, and same with Incineroar EX. And here's a new subsection of support Pokemon, the pre-evolutions! Since I mostly just focus on the evolutions, I did want you to know the pre-evolutions you should be crafting so you can, evolve those Pokemon. First up is the new Turtwig, which is better than the current one. Yes, it has a higher retreat cost and attack cost, but the ability means it survives a Moonlight Shuriken. You can't pass that up. 4 Totodile is 100% needed for a Feraligatr deck, so you don't have a choice since it's the only one in Standard. But the attack exists, giving Feraligatr a follow-up attack after it uses Giant Wave. Drillbur has a fun ability where you can discard up to 3 fighting energy from your deck when you play it from your hand onto the bench. This could be useful for Garchomp EX decks as well as Tinglu EX decks. Get 1 copy to mess around with. For all of the useful support Pokemon in Temporal Forces, you're going to want to set aside just over 5,000 credits. Iron Crown EX is definitely the best though, as the Future Box deck doesn't work without it. And now the moment you've been waiting for, the attacking Pokemon. To be honest, the EX Pokemon are a major letdown compared to the non-EX. Kind of like how my ex-wife is a major letdown compared to my current future ex-wife. For as good as Iron Leaves EX is, the best thing is that you only need one. Its whole purpose in life is to one-shot Charizard EX. So put a copy in Arceus Giratina, Lost Box, or Future Box, and when you place it from your hand onto the bench, you can move any amount of energy from your other Pokemon to it and deal 360 to a Charizard. You can always craft 2 for your Future Box deck to really hate on Charizard players, but at least 1 is an absolute must. The most divisive card in Temporal Forces, Raging Bolt EX, is something you'll want 3 copies of. People are hesitant to say it's good because they have flashbacks to Reshiram and Zekrom GX. For a Lightning and Fighting, it does 70 damage for each energy you discard from your Pokemon. Pair it with Sandy Cheeks, Gardevoir, or Palkia V-Star, and you're doing a considerable amount of damage each turn. Plus, it has the added benefit of being an ancient Pokemon, so it can use Sada and Ancient Booster. The only problem is that it might come up short early, leaving you playing a catch-up game, but you haven't worked out in a few years and your opponent does CrossFit. I'll admit I was wrong about Iron Boulder EX. 240 hit points is good, and the attack can put some chip damage into play, or KO some weak Pokemon thanks to Iron Crown EX and Future Booster. Then, if Iron Boulder gets hit the following turn, you put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. Just get 1 though, I wasn't that wrong. I had high hopes for Gouging Fire EX, but it hasn't seen any level of success in Japan. Still, having 1 isn't a bad idea for early game pressure with Charizard EX, able to deal 260 damage for 3 energy. You just can't do 260 again until you switch. Basically, it seems like a 2-prize Radiant Charizard, except Radiant Zard can eventually do 250 for 1 energy. Wait, am I talking myself out of saying you should craft this? No, never. My word is final. The backbones of the Ancient Box deck, you'll want 4 copies each of Roaring Moon and Koraidon. Since Roaring Moon does more damage for each Ancient card in your discard pile with Vengeance Fletching, you want as many useful Ancient cards as possible. Koraidon offers up a potential 180 damage on turns 1 and 2 while you're building up Roaring Moon, then you finish the rest of the game with that Roaring Moon. Another non-EX Ancient Pokemon to craft is 4 copies of Great Tusk. You can always include a copy or 2 of the Milling Great Tusk in Roaring Moon, but it's going to be powerful on its own as a mill deck. As long as you play an Ancient supporter that turn, it mills 4 cards. Professor Sada and Explorer's Guidance are 2 great Ancient supporters, so it shouldn't be a problem milling 4 cards every single turn. Then slap an Ancient booster on it to give it 200 hit points, meaning it's out of range of Charizard EX. Shifting to future Pokemon, you'll want at least 2 copies of the new baby Miraidon. You could make the argument that 4 copies is optimal since you always want Miraidon to be your starter, but you'll only want to attack with it once or twice per battle, making any additional copies redundant. The first attack, Peak Acceleration, does 40 damage and accelerates 2 energy to your future Pokemon. Put 3 Iron Crown EX down, now it's 100 damage. And don't overlook its second attack. It does 220 damage with 3 Iron Crown in play. Now that's a Sparking Strike. Speaking of future Pokemon, I can't believe I'm saying this, but you do want a copy of Iron Treads. I know, it seems terrible at first glance, but there is some usefulness. For a Metal under Colorless, it deals 60 damage while also sending 1 of those energy to a bench Pokemon. But if you attach a Future Booster, it becomes a Metal and Fighting type and does 80 damage. With 3 Iron Crown EX in play, you have a Metal and Fighting type that does 140 damage, which is able to KO Chien-Pao EX and Arceus V-Star thanks to weakness. One of the best single prize attackers in Temporal Forces, Feraligatr can do 280 damage for 2 water energy. That's the same number as Blastoise EX, except it doesn't give up 2 prizes and it doesn't require you to discard energy from your hand. The downside is that you have to damage Feraligatr in the process, and you can't use Great Wave the following turn. Japanese players have included a copy of Relicanth, allowing you to copy Totodile's attack, meaning you can follow up 280 with 130. Or, just use a switch. Don't even think, just craft 3 copies of Cinccino. Seriously, it's an insane attacker in Lugia, dealing 350 damage with 5 special energy attached. And best of all, the existing Minccino from Brilliant Stars has a Call for Family attack, helping your setup by putting any 2 basic Pokemon on your bench. If you're a Snorlax player who wants to pull it out from the hand, Lickitung is definitely an option. Paired with Lure Module, you can really screw them over. Lickitung's advantage over Manaphy is that it's beefier and can attack for a Jet Energy or Gift Energy. Otherwise, just ignore it and play Erika's and save yourself the hassle. To be honest with you, choosing attacking Pokemon is the toughest part of these guides. I tried to lean as heavily as possible into the best overall attackers, which meant a lot of Pokemon were left out. I'll talk about them in a second, but if you want to craft the strongest attackers in Temporal Forces, you'll need 10,000 credits. And we finish off with the fringe cards, the meme cards, and everything else in Temporal Forces that's at least worth mentioning, except for the cards I forgot about or just didn't feel like talking about. For the average player, very few of these are actually worth crafting in live. But if you used one of the infinite glitches in live and have 5 million credits, definitely get 4 of each in max rarity and laugh at the peasants who aren't subscribed to me. Let's start with the EXs, which were woefully underrepresented in the must craft section. Pokemon like Incineroar EX caused me so much grief. I know I can make them viable and win, but they aren't must-haves. 240 damage for as little as 1 energy, plus an extra 20 damage from burn, that's great! Use Relicanth and it can copy Torracat's Gritty Claws to survive an easy one-shot from Chien-Pao or Palkia, then follow it up with a big attack using Litten's Reprisal. Add a Hero's Cape to give it 420 HP or a Maximum Belt to do 310. But if your opponent limits their bench, you have to rely on Incineroar's pre-evolutions attacks, which aren't great. Still, if it were up to me and I didn't respect your credits, I'd say get 3 and build the damn deck. In the same vein, there's Walking Wake EX. The ability means it can hit Mimikyu and ignore Goodra's damage reduction, it pairs perfectly with Brute Bonnet to help it deal 240 damage, and you can use Palkia or Sada's Vitality to power it up. Again, this will win games. But over the course of 100 games, you'll find that the one-shot power of Chien-Pao EX is better on the waterfront, and the one-shot power of Roaring Moon EX is better on the ancient front. And if you really want to get critical, cutting out the Walking Wake and just pairing Palkia with Brute Bonnet seems much more better. Again though, if you have the credits, craft 3. Players in Japan tried to make Dragon Miraidon EX work, but it quickly faded away. You still might want to include a single copy in your Future Box deck, as it offers up a way to KO a Giratina V-Star, but Future Box exploits weaknesses with its versatility or goes crazy with extra prizes using Iron Hands. Miraidon EX is just kind of the odd motorcycle out. Speaking of which, we have Koraidon EX. If it wasn't for the fire energy requirement, you could easily put this in Baby Roaring Moon and have a big early attacker. But as it stands, the energy cost is just too awkward and you're much better off using Roaring Moon EX. Still, it's not a bad card, there's just a better option. What's nice about Torterra EX is that you don't have to build a brand new deck to find a place for it. Just chuck a copy or two into the existing Torterra deck and you have a beefy 340 hit point Pokemon who can do up to 180 damage for a Grass Energy. The problem with Torterra EX is that its attack requires you to have 6 Grass Pokemon in play for 180, meaning something like Babarrel is bad. Yeah, if you play Kricketune, it has 380 hit points, and if you attach a Hero's Cape, it has 480 hit points, meaning it's not Torterrable, but it's also not as good as the existing single prize Torterra. Yes, Gengar EX can be annoying. Whenever your opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, you put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon, and it stacks. But is it actually useful? Charizard EX attaches from the deck with its ability. Iron Hands EX attaches from the deck with Electric Generator and Miraidon's attack. And yeah, Chien-Pao isn't a fan of Gengar, but even if you have 3 Gengar in play, they can spread their energy around and still be fine. Plus, Gengar's attack only does 160 damage. Unfortunately, as nice as Gengar's tongue probably feels on your feet, the card just isn't good enough in our current future meta. Farigiraf EX is one of those cards that I thought would be more impactful. Basic Pokemon EX can't damage it, and using a Mist Energy or Toedscruel EX also makes it immune to effects of attacks. But the rise of Baby Roaring Moon has really hurt it. We'll see how it goes in a year when it's just EX Pokemon, but for now you can skip it. Same with Wugtrio EX. Yes, it can snipe up to 180 for a single energy, but that's not all that great. There's Manaphy to contend with, and even if you manage to Lost City or Canceling Cologne it, 180 isn't getting you very far. And the secondary attack only stops retreating, they can still easily knock you out. Scovillain EX has always been on the fringe of playability since releasing in Japan last year. The attack's damage is low at 140, but you discard a random card from their hand and a card from the top of their deck. If you happen to hit rare candies against Charizard, they lose. Pair it with Eri or Misfortune Sisters, they hate you. It's too close to a meme to be a true recommend, but with a little luck you can win some games. Now we move to the single prize Pokemon. Rabsca is basically a combination of Manaphy and Jirachi, though it is a stage 1. The ability is great, preventing all damage and effects of attacks done to your bench Pokemon. So you're protected against Moonlight Shuriken and Lost Mine, but again, it's a stage 1. When Manaphy rotates next year, it could be our only bench barrier option though. So get a copy if you want to have your future self thank your past self, which is your current future self since you can't craft it until the 21st. If you're playing a deck with a lot of one-of stadiums, Saucebuck is an intriguing option. Another stage 1, its ability just gets you a stadium every single turn. This would have been far more useful right now at bumping Path to the Peak, but it's something to think about. The memeiest card in Temporal Forces, Brambleghast, is just too fun to ignore. I can already hear For the Win lubing up his jaw to open it as wide as possible for the thumbnail. With a Cricketune in play, a Luxurious or Hero's Cape attached, and your opponent down to 1 prize card, Brambleghast has 490 hit points. Sure, it's still one shot by Radiant Charizard for a single energy, but if you get lucky on coin flips, it's hilarious. I'll be honest, I had no idea this card existed, but it could be used for annoying purposes. With Sharknado, attach a double turbo and you can discard up to 3 cards from your opponent's hand. You also deal 30 damage, but that's meh. Paired with Crushing Hammer and Misfortune Sisters and Ward Trio, this could be a budget mill deck. Then there's a couple of lightning boys. Raichu does 50 damage to each Pokemon with damage counters on it. You could use it against yourself to build up damage on a Dodrio, or to spread 50 damage each turn with a little bit of setup. You will have to Lost City or Canceling Kalagan their Manaphy though. And Vikavolt is going to definitely get some YouTube videos in a month when creators run out of ideas. For each Charjabug on your bench, it does an extra 80 damage. Realistically, you can expect to have 2 if everything's going well, so for 2 Lightning, you do 280 damage. Unfortunately, to me, it just seems like a worse for Alligator. Replacing Orbeetle as our weird Stage 2 accelerator, Reuniqueless looks at the top 8 cards of your deck and allows you to put any Pokemon you find there onto your bench, be it basics, Stage 1s, or Stage 2s. If you don't want to wang it, Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking is the perfect partner, putting whatever 2 Pokemon you want on top of your deck. When it comes to the targets for Salvatore, there's basically 2. Benetti X for item locking turn 1, and Bronzong for Evo locking turn 1. For a single Psychic Energy, Bronzong deals 30 damage and prevents your opponent from playing Pokemon from their hand to evolve next turn. This can shut down Stage 2 decks like Charizard EX, though they are still able to evolve through something like TM Evolution and Salvatore. Still, if you like being annoying, here you go. Pidove has one of the coolest abilities ever created, able to directly evolve into an Unfezant or Unfezant EX if it has 30 HP or less remaining. But unfortunately, it's not quite playable yet. The only place it really fits is with Zoroark V-Star. Even then, the Unfezant just does 50 damage with a double turbo attached and puts 2 energy attached to your opponent's active back into their hand. Depending how good the eventual Unfezant EX is though, this could be something you want 4 of. Chatot is the best bench filler post-rotation, but it's hard to see where it fits. Basculin puts 2 basics in play for free. Pidgey puts 2 in play and eventually evolves into Pidgeot EX. And Bombardier EX can put 3 in play on turn 1. I guess Chatot and a single prize deck with 4 Jet Energy is a thing, but then wouldn't Buddy-Buddy Poffin just be better? Still, think about it if you're making a single prize deck. This new baby Iron Valiant, meanwhile, pairs perfectly with Xatu. However, you need to play a future supporter to deal the full 200 damage, and there just aren't enough options. If we get a true future draw supporter in the future, this will definitely be a thing. For now, Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking just isn't enough to make this a reliable archetype. And finally, Iron Thorns. While I'm a fan of these types of cards, they never really work. But when they do, they're amazing. Iron Thorns looks at the top 5 cards of your deck, then does 70 damage for each future card there. You then discard those future cards and shuffle the rest back in. So load up your deck with future Pokemon, Miriam and Super Rod, and hope. In total, to craft all of the best cards from Temporal Forces, you'll need to spend roughly 21,000 credits. As a reminder, this is the full cost right now and doesn't take into account the free decks that will be given away starting on March 21st. Depending on how generous the developers are, you could have a big collection for free on day 1. It also doesn't count any of the fringe cards that players such as myself will be crafting, which will balloon the cost of the set to well over 30,000 credits. I'll include updated images in those free deck announcement videos when they go live, which will give you a better idea of how many credits you'll need. Until then, let me know if I undersold a certain card or if you disagree with any of the inclusions.